Welcome to this journey through one of humanity's most defining chapters, the First World War. The Great War, the war to end all wars. Get comfortable. Close your eyes if you wish. Let yourself be transported back in time to an era when the world changed forever, when empires crumbled and the modern age was born in fire and steel. This is not just a story of battles and military strategies. This is the story of millions of souls, of intertwined destinies, of century-old empires collapsing while new world orders emerge from their ashes. This is the story of the end of one world and the birth of another. Take a deep breath. We're going back in time to that fateful summer of 1914, when Europe stood at the edge of an abyss it didn't yet recognize. But to understand how the world plunged into this catastrophic conflict, we must first understand the world as it was before the guns began to fire. The year is 1913. Europe is at the height of its power and glory. The continent dominates the globe economically, politically, and culturally. The British Empire spans a quarter of the Earth's land surface. The French colonial empire stretches across Africa and Southeast Asia. The German Empire, unified less than half a century earlier, has become an industrial powerhouse that rivals Britain itself. The Austro-Hungarian Empire, ancient and sprawling, rules over a patchwork of nations and ethnic groups in Central Europe. The Russian Empire, vast beyond imagination, extends from the borders of Germany to the shores of the Pacific Ocean. This is the Belle Epoque, the beautiful era. In Paris, artists and intellectuals gather in cafes to discuss philosophy and art. In Vienna, the waltz captures the elegance of imperial society. In London, the theaters are full and the economy thrives. Technology is advancing at an unprecedented pace. Automobiles are becoming more common. Airplanes, barely a decade old, are already capturing imaginations. The telegraph and telephone connect distant cities. Electric lights illuminate the streets of major capitals. But beneath this glittering surface, tensions simmer. Old rivalries and new ambitions create a web of alliances and antagonisms that grows more complex with each passing year. Germany, having unified in 1871, seeks what it calls its place in the sun, a colonial empire to match those of Britain and France. This puts it at odds with the established powers. France has never forgotten the humiliation of its defeat in the Franco-Prussian War of 1870, when it lost the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine to the newly formed German Empire. The wound still burns. In the Balkans, the sick man of Europe, as the declining Ottoman Empire was known, continues to lose territory. Small nations emerge, each with their own ambitions and grievances. Serbia dreams of uniting all South Slavic peoples under its banner. This dream directly threatens Austria-Hungary, which rules over millions of Slavs in Bosnia, Croatia, and other territories. Russia, seeing itself as the protector of Slavic peoples and Orthodox Christians, watches the Balkans carefully, ready to extend its influence southward. Britain, long accustomed to its position as the world's preeminent naval power, views Germany's rapid naval expansion with growing alarm. Kaiser Wilhelm II, the German emperor, is determined to build a fleet that can challenge British supremacy. The naval race between these two powers consumes enormous resources and fuels mutual suspicion. These tensions have given birth to a system of alliances that will prove fatal. Germany and Austria-Hungary form the core of what becomes known as the Central Powers. They are joined by Italy, though that alliance will prove temporary. On the other side, France and Russia have formed an alliance, united by their common concern about German power. Britain, traditionally reluctant to commit to continental alliances, has nevertheless drawn closer to France through a series of agreements known as the Entente Cordiale. These three powers, Britain, France, and Russia, become known as the Triple Entente. The system is designed to maintain peace through the balance of power. If any nation starts a war, the theory goes, it will face overwhelming opposition. But the system has a fatal flaw. It means that a conflict between any two powers will likely draw in all the others. Europe has created a powder keg, and it needs only a spark. That spark comes on a sunny Sunday morning in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, on June 28, 1914. Archduke Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, is visiting the city with his wife, Sophie. It is their wedding anniversary. They ride through the streets in an open car, part of a motorcade. The crowds are thick. Security is surprisingly light. Along the route, 7 young assassins wait. They are members of a secret society called the Black Hand, dedicated to the creation of a greater Serbia. Most are barely out of their teens. They are armed with pistols and bombs. As the motorcade passes, one of them, Nedeljko Shabrinovic, throws a bomb at the Archduke's car. The bomb bounces off, exploding under the vehicle behind, injuring several people. Shabrinovic swallows a cyanide pill and jumps into the river Miljaka. But the pill is old and only makes him sick. The river is only a few inches deep. He is quickly captured. The Archduke's driver speeds away. Franz Ferdinand insists on visiting the wounded from the bombing at the hospital. But in the confusion, the driver takes a wrong turn, down a street where, by pure chance, another one of the assassins is standing. His name is Gavrilo Princip. He is 19 years old. Princip can barely believe his luck as the car stops almost directly in front of him, while the driver tries to reverse. He steps forward, draws his pistol, and fires twice. The first bullet strikes Sophie in the abdomen. The second hits Franz Ferdinand in the neck, severing his jugular vein. Sophie dies almost instantly. Franz Ferdinand's last words as he realizes his wife is dead are, "Sophie, Sophie, don't die. Stay alive for our children." He dies minutes later. 2 bullets, 2 deaths, and the world will never be the same. In Vienna, the Austro-Hungarian government sees an opportunity. The empire has been looking for a reason to crush Serbia, which it views as a threat to its territorial integrity. The assassination provides the perfect justification. But Austria-Hungary needs to ensure German support before acting. On July 5th, Germany gives Austria-Hungary what becomes known as the blank check, assuring Vienna of its full support, whatever action it decides to take. Austria-Hungary deliberates throughout July, carefully crafting a set of demands so harsh that Serbia cannot possibly accept them all. The ultimatum is presented to Serbia on July 23rd. Serbia has 48 hours to respond. The demands include allowing Austro-Hungarian officials to conduct investigations inside Serbian territory, effectively violating Serbian sovereignty. To nearly everyone's surprise, Serbia agrees to almost all the demands, but it balks at allowing foreign officials to operate on Serbian soil. Austria-Hungary declares this response insufficient. On July 28th, exactly 1 month after the assassination, Austria-Hungary declares war on Serbia. Now the alliance system begins to activate, like a series of dominoes falling. Russia, seeing itself as Serbia's protector, begins to mobilize its vast army. Russian mobilization is a slow, cumbersome process that takes weeks, so military planners insist they must start immediately. Germany, watching Russian mobilization, feels threatened. The German military has long feared a two-front war against Russia in the east and France in the west. Their solution is the Schlieffen Plan, named after the former chief of the German General Staff. The Schlieffen Plan is based on the assumption that Russia will be slow to mobilize while France will be quick. Therefore, Germany must knock France out of the war rapidly before turning its full attention to Russia. To accomplish this, German armies will sweep through Belgium, bypassing French border fortifications, and encircle Paris from the west. It is a bold, aggressive plan that requires precise timing, and it requires violating Belgian neutrality. On August 1st, Germany declares war on Russia. On August 3rd, Germany declares war on France and demands passage through Belgium. Belgium refuses. Its neutrality has been guaranteed by treaty since 1839, with Britain among the guarantor nations. On August 4th, German troops cross into Belgium. Britain, citing its treaty obligations and genuinely alarmed by German aggression, issues an ultimatum demanding German withdrawal. When the deadline passes without response, Britain declares war on Germany. The Great War has begun. The German armies that pour into Belgium in August 1914 are the most powerful military force ever assembled. They number over 1 million men, organized with ruthless efficiency. They are equipped with the most modern weapons. Heavy artillery, machine guns. The Belgian army, small and poorly equipped, fights bravely, but is overwhelmed. The fortress city of Liège holds out for 12 days before falling. The Germans push forward, but the Belgian resistance, though ultimately futile, has consumed precious time. The Schlieffen Plan depends on speed, and already the timetable is slipping. Meanwhile, stories of German atrocities in Belgium spread across the world. Some are exaggerated or fabricated, but many are true. Civilians are executed in reprisal for resistance. Towns are burned. The ancient library of Louvain, containing irreplaceable medieval manuscripts, is destroyed. The world is shocked. Germany's image as a civilized nation is badly tarnished. The French, meanwhile, have their own plan. Plan de Stéphane calls for aggressive offensives into Alsace-Lorraine, the provinces lost to Germany in 1871. French generals believe in the power of offensive spirit, the élan vital that will carry French soldiers to victory through sheer courage and determination. They are wrong. When French armies advance into Alsace-Lorraine in August, they walk into a slaughter. German machine guns and artillery cut down French soldiers by the thousands. The French uniform, which includes bright red trousers, makes them easy targets. In the Battle of the Frontiers, France suffers over 300,000 casualties in less than 3 weeks, including 27,000 dead in a single day on August 22nd. It is the bloodiest day in French military history. The German armies continue their sweep through Belgium and into northern France. They seem unstoppable. The French government prepares to evacuate Paris, but the Germans are tired. They have been marching for weeks in summer heat, carrying heavy packs. Supply lines are stretched, and crucially, the German commander, Helmuth von Moltke the Younger, makes a fateful decision. He orders the First Army, the northernmost German force, to wheel east of Paris rather than west, as the Schlieffen Plan had envisioned. This change, meant to maintain better contact with the Second Army and respond to Russian movements in the east, exposes the German flank. The French commander-in-chief, Joseph Joffre, is unflappable. Despite the catastrophic defeats of August, he remains calm. He now sees an opportunity. The Germans have overextended themselves. On September 6th, French and British forces attacked the German flank along the Marne River. This begins the First Battle of the Marne, one of the most important battles in history. For 3 days, the outcome hangs in the balance. Over 2 million men fight along a front stretching more than 150 miles. The fighting is desperate. At one point, the French rush 6,000 reserve troops from Paris to the front in 600 taxicabs, an incident that becomes legendary. On September 9th, the German commanders, realizing they cannot win, order a retreat. The Schlieffen Plan has failed. Paris is saved. But the war is far from over. Both sides race north, trying to outflank each other in what becomes known as the race to the sea. By November, the front has stabilized, running from the English Channel to the Swiss border, a distance of over 400 miles. Neither side can break through. Neither side is willing to retreat. The war of movement is over. The soldiers begin to dig. At first, the trenches are simple ditches, barely adequate for shelter. But as weeks turn into months, they become more elaborate. A typical trench system eventually consists of 3 parallel lines. The front line, where soldiers face the enemy directly, is backed by a support trench, which in turn is backed by a reserve trench. Communication trenches connect them. Behind the trenches are bunkers and dugouts, some quite elaborate, dug into the earth. Between the opposing trenches is no man's land, a strip of churned earth ranging from a few dozen yards to several hundred yards wide. It is filled with barbed wire, shell craters, and the bodies of the dead. To cross no man's land is to invite death. Machine guns can fire 600 rounds per minute, Artillery can drop shells with devastating accuracy. Snipers wait patiently for any target. Life in the trenches is a special kind of hell. The trenches are muddy, especially in the winter when rain and snow turn them into rivers of filth. Soldiers stand in water for days, leading to trench foot, a painful condition that can result in gangrene and amputation. Rats, some as large as cats, feast on corpses and scattered food. Lice infest every uniform, causing constant itching and spreading disease. The smell is overwhelming, a mixture of decomposing bodies, human waste, poison gas, and unwashed men. The daily routine becomes grimly familiar. Stand to at dawn when both sides man their firing steps in case of attack. Breakfast, usually weak tea and hard biscuits. Repair work during the day, fixing damaged sections of trench. Stand to again at dusk. Then the night, when patrols venture into no man's land to repair wire, gather intelligence, or raid enemy trenches. Sleep comes in snatches, interrupted by artillery bombardments and the crack of rifles. Death is random and constant. A sniper's bullet, a shell that happens to land in your section of trench. A raid that goes wrong, disease. Some men break under the strain, suffering from what is then called shell shock, what we would now recognize as post-traumatic stress disorder. The military medical establishment often treats these men as cowards, though a few enlightened doctors recognize it as a genuine psychological injury. Yet amidst this horror, soldiers find ways to maintain their humanity. They write letters home, carefully censored by officers. They sing songs, some patriotic, many bawdy, or cynical. They form deep bonds with their comrades, bonds forged in shared suffering. On Christmas Day 1914, in some sectors, German and British soldiers spontaneously declare an informal truce. They climb out of their trenches, meet in no man's land, exchange gifts, play football. Officers on both sides are horrified when they learn of it. Such fraternization is strictly forbidden for the remainder of the war. While the Western Front solidifies into stalemate, events unfold across the globe. This is not just a European war. It is truly a world war. In Africa, colonial powers fight for control of Germany's colonies. In the Pacific, Japan seizes German possessions in China and the Pacific Islands. In the Middle East, the Ottoman Empire enters the war on the side of the Central Powers in November 1914, opening new fronts against Russia in the Caucasus and against Britain in Egypt and Mesopotamia. The entry of the Ottoman Empire is particularly significant. The Ottomans control the Dardanelles, the straits connecting the Mediterranean to the Black Sea. This effectively cuts off Russia from its allies in Western Europe, eliminating the southern supply route. Russia can only be reached through the Arctic port of Archangel, which is icebound much of the year, or through the Pacific port of Vladivostok, thousands of miles from the front lines. Winston Churchill, then First Lord of the Admiralty, proposes a bold solution. The Allies should force the Dardanelles, capture Constantinople, knock the Ottoman Empire out of the war, and open a supply line to Russia. It might also encourage neutral Balkan nations to join the Allied side. The plan is approved, though with insufficient resources allocated to ensure success. The naval attempt begins in February 1915. Allied warships bombard Ottoman forts guarding the straits. But when they try to advance, they encounter unexpected minefields. 3 battleships are sunk in a single day in March. The naval attack is called off. The planners decide to land troops on the Gallipoli Peninsula to secure the straits from land. The landings begin on April 25, 1915. British, French, and Anzac forces, soldiers from Australia and New Zealand, storm ashore at several beaches. They meet fierce resistance from Ottoman forces, commanded by a talented officer named Mustafa Kemal, who will later become known as Ataturk. The Ottomans hold the high ground and rain fire down on the beaches. The Allied advance stalls almost immediately. Gallipoli becomes another stalemate, another nightmare. The trenches here are even closer than on the Western Front, sometimes only a few yards apart. The heat is oppressive, water is scarce, dysentery and other diseases ravage the troops. For 8 months, men die by the thousands for hills and gullies with no strategic value. In December 1915 and January 1916, the Allies evacuate, the one part of the operation conducted with complete success. Gallipoli is a costly failure that claims over 250,000 Allied and Ottoman casualties. On the Eastern Front, the war is different. The distances are vast, the terrain varied. There are not enough men to create continuous trench lines as in the West. The war here remains more mobile, with sweeping advances and retreats. But it is no less deadly. In August 1914, Russia moves more quickly than expected, invading East Prussia while German forces are concentrated against France. The Battle of Tannenberg in late August is a catastrophe for Russia. 2 German generals, Paul von Hindenburg and Erich Ludendorff, encircle and destroy an entire Russian army. Nearly 100,000 Russian soldiers are captured. It is one of the most complete military victories in history. Hindenburg and Ludendorff become German heroes. But Russia is vast and resilient. Despite horrific losses, Russian armies continue to fight. They achieve significant success against Austria-Hungary, whose army proves far less capable than Germany's. By the end of 1914, Russian forces have occupied Galicia, the northernmost province of Austria-Hungary. In 1915, Germany decides to focus on knocking Russia out of the war. The Germans and Austro-Hungarians launch a massive offensive in May. Russian forces, already short of rifles, ammunition and artillery shells, fall back hundreds of miles. Poland is lost. By September, over 1 million Russian soldiers have been killed, wounded, or captured. Yet still Russia does not collapse. The retreat finally stabilizes. The Russian army, battered but intact, digs in. The human cost of 1915 is staggering across all fronts. France launches a series of offensives in Champagne and Artois, attempting to break through German lines. The attacks gain a few miles at most and cost hundreds of thousands of casualties. Britain, now fielding a mass army of volunteers, joins these offensives. At the Battle of Loos in September, the British use poison gas for the first time. The wind shifts, blowing the gas back toward British trenches. The battle is another costly failure. Poison gas had been introduced by the Germans at the Second Battle of Ypres in April 1915. Chlorine gas, heavier than air, rolls across no man's land and into Allied trenches. Soldiers, completely unprepared, de-choking, their lungs burned. It is a weapon of terror. Soon all sides are using gas, developing more lethal varieties like phosgene and mustard gas. Soldiers learn to carry gas masks at all times. Gas becomes one more horror in a war filled with horrors, though it kills relatively few compared to shells and bullets. As 1915 ends, all sides are beginning to understand that this war will not be short. The initial enthusiasm has long since faded. This is industrial warfare on a scale never before seen. Factories churn out shells by the millions. Entire economies are reorganized to support the war effort. Governments take unprecedented control over industry and labor. Rationing is introduced. Women enter the workforce in unprecedented numbers, taking jobs in munitions factories and other essential industries. The year 1916 brings no relief, only intensification. The German Chief of Staff, Erich von Falkenhayn, devises a new strategy. Since breakthroughs seem impossible, Germany will instead bleed France white at a place the French cannot afford to lose. That place is Verdun, an ancient fortress city on the Meuse River. The Battle of Verdun begins on February 21st, 1916, with a bombardment of unprecedented fury. Over 1,200 German guns fire nearly 1 million shells in the first 12 hours. The Germans advance, capturing Fort Douaumont, the strongest fortress in the Verdun complex, within days. The French are reeling, but they do not break. General Philippe Pétain organizes a determined defense. Supplies and reinforcements pour into Verdun along a single road that becomes known as the Sacred Way. The battle becomes a symbol of French determination. "They shall not pass" becomes the rallying cry. The fighting at Verdun continues for 10 months, the longest single battle of the war. Villages are obliterated, reduced to smears of brick dust on the landscape. The earth is churned into a moonscape by millions of shells. Men fight hand to hand in the ruins of forts. They choke in clouds of poison gas. They are buried alive when shells collapse their dugouts. The battlefield becomes a vision of hell on earth. By the time the battle ends in December 1916, little has changed strategically. The Germans have advanced a few miles, but the human cost is astronomical. France suffers over 300,000 casualties. Germany suffers similar losses. Falkenhayn's plan to bleed France white has instead bled both nations. While Verdun rages, the British prepare their own offensive. The Battle of the Somme is intended to relieve pressure on Verdun and break through German lines in northern France. It is to be the great push that wins the war. The British commander, Field Marshal Douglas Haig, plans a week-long preliminary bombardment that will destroy German trenches, cut barbed wire, and shatter enemy morale. Then infantry will advance across no man's land to occupy the ruins. The bombardment begins on June 24, 1916. For 7 days, British guns fire over 1.7 million shells. The sound can be heard across the English Channel. Surely nothing can survive such a bombardment. But the German dugouts are deep, some 40 feet underground. The shells, many defective, fail to cut the wire as planned. And the Germans, having learned from their experiences at Verdun, have developed defense in depth, with second and third lines of trenches ready to contain any breakthrough. On the morning of July 1st, 1916 at 7:30 a.m., British infantry climb out of their trenches and begin walking across no man's land. They walk because they are carrying heavy loads of equipment, up to 70 pounds per man. They have been told the Germans will all be dead. They are wrong. German machine gunners, emerging from their dugouts, can hardly believe what they see. Line after line of British soldiers advancing in the open. Walking slowly, perfect targets. The machine gunners open fire. The slaughter is immense. In some sectors, entire battalions are cut down before they can reach German wire. In other areas, small groups of British soldiers do break into German trenches, only to be killed or captured when reinforcements cannot reach them. By the end of that first day, the British have suffered nearly 60,000 casualties, including 19,000 dead. It is the bloodiest single day in British military history. Some battalions, composed of men from the same towns who enlisted together in what were called PALS battalions, are virtually wiped out. Entire communities back in Britain will be devastated when the casualty lists are published. Yet, the Battle of the Somme continues for 4.5 more months. Haig, convinced that the Germans are on the verge of collapse, keeps attacking. New weapons are introduced. In September, the British used tanks for the first time, though in small numbers and with mixed results. The tanks are slow, unreliable, and mechanically primitive. But they hint at the future of warfare. When the Somme offensive finally ends in November, the British and French have advanced about 6 miles at the deepest point. The cost is over 600,000 Allied casualties, and perhaps 500,000 German casualties. The gains are negligible. The human cost is almost incomprehensible. For many, 1916 becomes the year when hope truly dies, when it becomes clear that this war will not end soon or cleanly, that an entire generation is being fed into a meat grinder for goals that no longer seem clear or achievable. Soldiers on all sides begin to question what they are fighting for. But still they fight. They fight because their friends are fighting. They fight because to refuse is to face a firing squad. They fight because they no longer know how to do anything else. Meanwhile, at sea, the British Royal Navy enforces a blockade of Germany, preventing war materials and food from reaching German ports. The blockade is remarkably effective. As the war continues, food shortages in Germany become acute. The winter of 1916 to 1917 becomes known as the Turnip Winter. when turnips replace potatoes and bread as the main food staple. Malnutrition becomes widespread. Some historians estimate that the blockade ultimately causes hundreds of thousands of German civilian deaths. Germany responds with unrestricted submarine warfare. German U-boats sink merchant ships without warning, including neutral vessels carrying supplies to Britain. This is a violation of international law, which requires warning civilian ships and allowing time for evacuation. But Germany, desperate to starve Britain as Britain is starving Germany, believes submarine warfare is worth the risk. The most famous incident occurs on May 7, 1915, when a German submarine torpedoes the British ocean liner Lusitania off the coast of Ireland. The ship sinks in 18 minutes. Nearly 1,200 people die, including 128 Americans. The sinking causes outrage in the United States and brings America closer to entering the war, though not yet. Under pressure from President Woodrow Wilson, Germany temporarily ceases unrestricted submarine warfare. But in early 1917, Germany makes a fateful decision. The German High Command calculates that unrestricted submarine warfare can force Britain to surrender within 5 months before America can effectively intervene, even if it does declare war. On February 1, 1917, Germany announces the resumption of unrestricted submarine warfare. All ships, including those from neutral nations, are now targets in a declared war zone around the British Isles. The decision will prove catastrophic for Germany. Within days, President Wilson breaks off diplomatic relations. Then British intelligence intercepts and decodes a telegram from German Foreign Minister Arthur Zimmermann to the German ambassador in Mexico. The Zimmermann telegram proposes an alliance between Germany and Mexico. If the United States enters the war, Mexico should attack the United States to reclaim the territories of Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona lost in the 19th century. Germany promises to support Mexico with funding and support. When the British share the decoded telegram with the Americans, public opinion in the United States shifts dramatically. The telegram makes clear that Germany views the United States as an enemy. Combined with continued submarine attacks on American ships, the Zimmermann telegram tips the balance. On April 6, 1917, the United States declares war on Germany. American entry will eventually prove decisive, but not immediately. The United States in 1917 has a small army, barely 100,000 men. It will take over a year to recruit, train, equip, and transport a mass army to Europe. In the meantime, the Allies must hold on. The year 1917 brings crisis after crisis. In April, France launches yet another offensive, the Nivelle Offensive, named after General Robert Nivelle, who promises a breakthrough within 48 hours. It is a disaster. French armies attack heavily fortified German positions along the Chemin des Dames Ridge. The Germans, forewarned, are ready. The French suffer 120,000 casualties in the first week alone. The promised breakthrough never materializes. The failure of the Nivelle offensive breaks something in the French army. Mutinies spread through dozens of divisions. Soldiers refuse to attack, though they agree to hold their trenches. They are not cowards or traitors. They are simply exhausted, fed up with being sent to slaughter for generals who seem to have learned nothing. The French government and high command panic. If the mutinies spread, or if the Germans learn of them, France could lose the war. General Pétain, the hero of Verdun, is given command. He handles the mutinies with a mixture of firmness and understanding. Some leaders are court-martialed and executed pour encourager les autres. But Pétain also improves conditions, increases leave, ensures better food, and most importantly, promises no more wasteful offensives. Slowly, discipline is restored. The Germans never learn the full extent of the mutiny. France survives its darkest hour. Britain, meanwhile, continues attacking. Throughout the summer and fall of 1917, British and Commonwealth forces attack in Flanders, around the Belgian city of Ypres. The Third Battle of Ypres, better known as Passchendaele, becomes a byword for futility and suffering. The battlefield is low-lying land, crisscrossed by drainage ditches. British bombardment destroys the drainage system. When rain falls, as it does constantly that autumn, the battlefield becomes a swamp. Men drown in shell craters filled with liquid mud. Wounded soldiers who slip off the duckboards that provide the only solid footing can disappear into the mire. For 3 months, British and Commonwealth troops attack. The gains are measured in hundreds of yards. The village of Passchendaele, which gives the battle its name, is finally captured in November. The cost is over 300,000 British and Commonwealth casualties for an advance of about 5 miles. Even Haig's most loyal supporters begin to question whether the cost is justified. But while the Western Front grinds on inconclusively, events in the East are reaching a climax. Russia is collapsing. The strain of 3 years of war has broken the Tsarist system. Food shortages in Russian cities lead to strikes and demonstrations. In March 1917, soldiers in Petrograd, as St. Petersburg has been renamed, refused to fire on demonstrators. The army is no longer reliable. Tsar Nicholas II, seeing no alternative, abdicates. A provisional government takes power, promising to continue the war while implementing democratic reforms. But the provisional government cannot solve Russia's fundamental problems. The war is still draining the country. Soldiers continue to die in offensives that achieve nothing. Peasants want land reform. Workers want bread. The Bolsheviks, a revolutionary socialist party led by Vladimir Lenin, promise peace, land, and bread. Lenin, who has been living in exile in Switzerland, is transported back to Russia by the Germans in a sealed train. The Germans hope he will spread defeatism and take Russia out of the war. They are more successful than they could have imagined. In November 1917, using the Russian old calendar, it is October. The Bolsheviks seize power in a nearly bloodless coup in Petrograd. Lenin immediately begins peace negotiations with Germany. On March 3, 1918, Russia signs the Treaty of Brest-Litovsk, accepting extremely harsh terms. Russia loses Poland, the Baltic states, Finland, and Ukraine. It is a humiliating peace, but for Lenin, peace is necessary to consolidate Bolshevik power. The Eastern Front ceases to exist. Germany now faces only one front. The German High Command, now effectively controlled by Hindenburg and Ludendorff, can transfer hundreds of thousands of troops from east to west. For the first time since 1914, Germany has numerical superiority on the Western Front. But time is running out. American troops are arriving in increasing numbers. Soon the Allies will have overwhelming strength. If Germany is to win, it must win now. In the spring of 1918, before the Americans arrive in force, the German Spring Offensive, also called the Kaiser's Battle, or the Ludendorff Offensive, begins on March 21, 1918. It is Germany's last gamble. The Germans use new tactics, developed through hard experience. Instead of long bombardments that sacrifice surprise, short, intense bombardments. Stormtroopers, specially trained assault troops, infiltrate enemy lines, bypassing strong points to spread confusion in the rear. Follow-up forces deal with bypassed positions. The tactics work brilliantly. On the first day, German forces advanced 12 miles, more than any offensive has achieved since 1914. British positions collapse. Entire divisions retreat in disorder. Within days, the Germans have advanced 40 miles. Paris is threatened. The French government again considers evacuation. Ludendorff believes he is winning, but the German advance creates its own problems. As they advance, German troops outrun their supplies. Artillery cannot keep up, and the German soldiers, many of whom have been on short rations for months due to the blockade, stop to loot captured British supply dumps. Discipline breaks down. The advance slows. Meanwhile, the Allies finally establish unified command. French General Ferdinand Foch is appointed Supreme Allied Commander, coordinating British, French, and American forces. American troops, though still inexperienced, are arriving at the rate of 10,000 per day. The Allies rush reinforcements to threatened sectors. By early April, the German offensive has been contained, though at tremendous cost. Ludendorff launches more offensives throughout the spring, each less successful than the last. German casualties are mounting, and unlike the Allies, Germany has no fresh reserves. By mid-July, the German army is exhausted. It has lost its best soldiers, the stormtroopers who led the attacks. Morale is declining as soldiers realize that despite all their sacrifices, they are no closer to victory. On July 18, 1918, the Allies counterattack. The Second Battle of the Marne uses over 300,000 French and American troops. German forces, overextended and exhausted, fall back. It is the beginning of the end. August 8, 1918, becomes what Ludendorff calls the Black Day of the German army. British, Canadian and Australian forces, supported by over 500 tanks, break through German lines near Amiens. For the first time, significant numbers of German soldiers surrender without serious resistance. Ludendorff realizes Germany cannot win, but the German High Command is not yet ready to admit defeat. Throughout the fall of 1918, Allied forces advance on all fronts. American troops, now numbering over 2 million, take a larger role. In September, the Americans reduce the St. Mihiel salient and then attack in the Meuse-Argonne, the largest American battle of the war. British and French forces push forward across the old Somme battlefields. Belgian, British and French forces advance in Flanders. The German army is retreating but still fighting. It is conducting a skilled withdrawal, making the Allies pay for every mile. But everyone knows the end is approaching. Germany's allies are collapsing. Bulgaria signs an armistice in September. The Ottoman Empire, its armies defeated in Palestine and Mesopotamia by British and Arab forces, surrenders in October. Austria-Hungary, its multi-ethnic empire disintegrating from within, signs an armistice on November 3rd. Germany stands alone. Inside Germany, the situation is desperate. The blockade has caused widespread hunger. The Spanish flu pandemic, which will ultimately kill more people worldwide than the war itself, is ravaging the population. Industrial production is declining. There are strikes and demonstrations in major cities. The German people are exhausted. On October 29, 1918, sailors in the German High Seas Fleet mutiny when ordered to make a suicidal attack on the British fleet. The mutiny spreads to other ports and then to cities across Germany. Workers' and soldiers' councils seize power in many areas. Revolution is spreading. On November 9th, Kaiser Wilhelm II abdicates and flees to the Netherlands. Germany is proclaimed a republic. The new German government, desperate to prevent complete chaos and possible Bolshevik revolution, immediately seeks an armistice. Representatives meet with Allied commanders in a railway carriage in the forest of Compiègne in northern France. The terms are harsh. Germany must evacuate all occupied territory. It must surrender vast quantities of military equipment. Allied forces will occupy the Rhineland. The naval blockade will continue until a final peace treaty is signed. The German delegation protests that the terms are too severe, but they have no choice. At 5:00 a.m. on November 11, 1918, the armistice is signed. It will take effect at 11:00 a.m. that same day, the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month. That morning, fighting continues right up until the deadline. Artillery fires its last shells. Infantry launch final attacks. Men in the last minutes of the war, killed in battles that no longer matter. At 11:00 a.m., an eerie silence falls over the Western Front. After 4 years, 3 months, and 1 week, the guns fall silent. Soldiers on both sides emerge cautiously from their trenches. Some shake hands across no man's land. Some simply stand in stunned silence, unable to quite believe it is over. Many are too numb to feel anything. They have seen too much, lost too much. The celebrations begin slowly at first, then build. In Paris, London, and New York, crowds pour into the streets. Church bells ring. People dance and sing. It is over. The war to end all wars is finally over. Millions who feared they would never see this day weep with relief and joy. But the joy is tempered by grief. The numbers are almost incomprehensible. Over 9 million soldiers dead. France has lost 1.4 million men, nearly an entire generation of young men. Britain and its empire have lost nearly 1 million. Germany has lost 2 million. Russia. Exact figures are impossible to determine, but at least 1.8 million, probably far more. Austria-Hungary, nearly 1.5 million. Italy, over 600,000. The United States, which fought for only 19 months, has lost 116,000. And these are only the military dead. Civilian casualties from military action, disease, and famine number in the millions more. Armenia suffers genocide at Ottoman hands, with over 1 million dead. The Spanish flu, spread by troop movements and mass gatherings, kills between 50 and 100 million people worldwide in 1918 and 1918, far more than the war itself. Millions more soldiers return home wounded. Some are missing limbs, their bodies shattered by shells and bullets. Others bear invisible wounds, psychological scars that will never fully heal. They have seen and done things that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. An entire generation is traumatized. The economic cost is equally staggering. Europe, which dominated the world in 1914, is bankrupt. Britain and France owe enormous debts to the United States, which emerges from the war as the world's leading economic power. Germany's economy is in ruins. The Russian economy has collapsed entirely. Infrastructure across Eastern Europe and the former Ottoman Empire has been destroyed. The war has transformed society. Women, having proven their capabilities in factories and offices during the war, will increasingly demand and receive the right to vote and greater social freedoms. Class structures already weakening before the war are further undermined. The old aristocracies have lost their legitimacy. A generation of young officers and men from all classes has died together in the mud. Politically, the map of Europe and the Middle East is redrawn. 4 empires have fallen. The German Empire becomes the Weimar Republic. The Austro-Hungarian Empire fragments into Austria, Hungary, Czechoslovakia, and Yugoslavia, with territories also going to Poland, Romania, and Italy. The Russian Empire has become the Soviet Union, a communist state that terrifies Western leaders. The Ottoman Empire collapses, becoming the Turkish Republic, while its Arab territories are divided between Britain and France as League of Nations mandates. The peace conference opens in Paris in January 1919. Representatives of 32 nations attend, but the real decisions are made by the Big Four: President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of Britain, Prime Minister Georges Clemenceau of France, and Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando of Italy. Germany is not invited to the negotiations. It will be presented with the treaty and told to sign. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Franz Ferdinand, imposes harsh terms on Germany. Germany must accept full responsibility for causing the war. The famous Article 231, the War Guilt Clause. Germany loses all its colonies and significant European territory. Alsace-Lorraine returns to France. Large areas in the east go to the new state of Poland. The Rhineland will be occupied by Allied forces for 15 years and permanently demilitarized. Germany's army is limited to 100,000 men, and it is forbidden to have an air force, submarines, or tanks. Germany must pay reparations, though the exact amount will be determined later. Many Germans view the treaty as a humiliation and a betrayal. They had expected a negotiated peace based on Wilson's 14 points, which called for a peace without victory. Instead, they receive what they see as a dictated peace that treats Germany as solely guilty for a war in which all powers share responsibility. The treaty creates deep resentment in Germany that will have catastrophic consequences 2 decades later. The Paris Peace Conference creates the League of Nations, Wilson's dream of an international organization to prevent future wars. But the United States Senate refuses to ratify the Treaty of Versailles, and America never joins the League. Without American participation, the League is weakened from the start. Other treaties deal with Germany's former allies, Austria and Hungary are reduced to small states. The Ottoman Empire is carved up, with Britain and France taking control of the Middle East, drawing borders with little regard for ethnic or religious divisions, creating problems that persist to this day. Millions of people find themselves in new countries they never asked to join, often as oppressed minorities. In the years following the war, the world struggles to return to normal, but normal no longer exists. The war has changed everything. It has destroyed faith in progress, in rationality, in the goodness of Western civilization. How could civilized nations commit such slaughter? How could educated men design such efficient methods of killing? The certainties of the 19th century are gone. Artists and writers try to capture the experience. The poets of the trenches, men like Wilfred Owen, Siegfried Sassoon, and Isaac Rosenberg, write of the horror and pity of war. Owen, killed just 1 week before the armistice, writes that his subject is war, and the pity of war, and that all a poet can do is warn. Painters like Otto Dix create nightmarish visions of the Western Front. Novelists like Erich Maria Remarque, in All Quiet on the Western Front, capture the disillusionment of the lost generation. The war also shapes politics for decades. The harsh treatment of Germany and the economic chaos of the 1920s create conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The Russian Revolution leads to the creation of the Soviet Union, which will be locked in ideological struggle with the West for over 70 years. Colonial subjects who fought for their European masters begin to demand independence, starting the process of decolonization that will transform the world in the mid-20th century. The First World War is in many ways the central event of the 20th century. It ends the long 19th century, that period of relative peace and progress in Europe from 1815 to 1914. It begins the short 20th century, an era of ideological conflicts, total war, and revolutionary change that will last until 1991. Almost every major event of the 20th century can be traced back in some way to the First World War and its aftermath. For those who lived through it, the war remains the defining experience of their lives. They are forever changed. Some spend the rest of their lives trying to find meaning in the suffering and loss. Many never speak of their experiences, the memories too painful to put into words. They return to a world that cannot understand what they have endured, a world that often does not want to hear about it. Veterans organizations form, bringing together men who share the bond of having survived the trenches. They march in parades on Armistice Day, later renamed Veterans Day in America, and Remembrance Day in Britain and the Commonwealth. They wear poppies, the red flowers that grew in profusion on the devastated battlefields of Flanders, as a symbol of remembrance. They observe 2 minutes of silence at the 11th hour of the 11th day of the 11th month, remembering the fallen. The battlefields themselves become places of pilgrimage. Cemeteries are established, row after row of white headstones marking the graves of the dead. The Menin Gate in Ypres lists the names of 54,000 British and Commonwealth soldiers who died in the Ypres salient and have no known grave. Every evening at 8:00 p.m., traffic stops and buglers play the last post, a ritual that has continued almost every single day since 1928. The Thiepval Memorial on the Somme bears the names of over 72,000 British and South African soldiers with no known grave. At Verdun, the Douaumont ossuary contains the bones of 130,000 unidentified French and German soldiers. These memorials stand as eternal witnesses to the scale of loss. Every name represents a life cut short, a family devastated, potential unfulfilled. The young men who died at 19 or 20 never married, never had children, never pursued the dreams they held before the war consumed them. Their absence is a wound that never fully heals. As the decades pass, the veterans grow old. By the 1970s and 1980s, they are in their 80s and 90s. Journalists and historians rush to record their memories before they are lost forever. The old men, some of them reluctantly, speak of things they have kept silent about for 50 or 60 years. They talk about the fear, the cold, the mud, the rats, the gas, the shelling, the attacks across no man's land. the friends who died beside them. They talk about moments of unexpected humanity, the times when enemies helped each other, the informal truces, the small acts of kindness in the midst of horror. The last veterans die in the early 21st century. Florence Green, who served in the Royal Air Force, dies in 2012 at the age of 110, the last known veteran of the war. With her death, living memory of the First World War passes into history. There is no one left who can say, "I was there, I remember." But the war is not forgotten. It cannot be forgotten. Its consequences are still with us. The borders it created still exist and still cause conflict. The political movements it spawned still shape our world. The technological developments it accelerated, from aircraft to computers to methods of mass production, define modern life. The questions it raised about the nature of war, about the relationship between citizen and state, about the meaning of sacrifice, remain unanswered. Perhaps most importantly, the First World War stands as a warning. It shows how quickly civilization can collapse into barbarism. It demonstrates the danger of nationalism taken to extremes, of rigid alliances that escalate small conflicts into global catastrophes, of military planning that removes human decision-making from the equation. It reveals how leaders can commit their nations to war without truly understanding the consequences, how they can continue wars long after any rational cost-benefit analysis would demand peace. The men who began the war in 1914, many of them at least, thought it would be a short, glorious affair, over by Christmas. They could not imagine the horrors that would unfold. They could not foresee that they were unleashing forces that would devastate a continent and change the world forever. They believed they were defending honor and national interest. Instead, they created a catastrophe that consumed millions of lives and destroyed the world they were trying to preserve. The soldiers who fought knew better. They learned in the trenches that war, modern war, was not glorious. It was not heroic in the way they had been taught to believe. It was mud and blood and death, random and senseless. The bravest men died just as easily as cowards. Luck mattered more than skill or courage. And in the end, what did it achieve? What was gained that was worth the price paid? These are uncomfortable questions, questions without easy answers. But they must be asked, and each generation must answer them anew. The dead of the First World War deserve that much. They gave everything, often willingly, believing in causes their leaders told them were just and necessary. The least we can do is remember them, honor their sacrifice, and learn from their suffering. The guns fell silent on November 11th, 1918. But the echoes of those guns still reverberate through our world. The war that was supposed to end all wars instead planted the seeds of even greater conflicts. The peace that was supposed to heal Europe's wounds instead created new grievances and hatreds. The brave new world that was supposed to emerge from the ashes of the old was just as flawed, just as capable of terrible things. And yet, from all that suffering, some good emerged. The League of Nations failed, but the United Nations that replaced it after the Second World War has, for all its flaws, helped prevent a third global conflict. The horrors of the trenches led to international laws attempting to limit the worst excesses of war. The sacrifices of those who fought led eventually to greater democracy, to expanded rights for workers and women, to a questioning of old hierarchies and assumptions. The generation that survived the First World War was determined that their children would not have to endure what they had endured, that they failed. That the Second World War came just 20 years later is one of history's great tragedies. But even that failure taught lessons. The leaders who created the post-1945 order had lived through both world wars. They understood in a way perhaps only their generation could, the absolute necessity of preventing such conflicts in the future. As you drift towards sleep, think of those soldiers in the trenches. Think of them writing letters home by candlelight, trying to reassure loved ones they might never see again. Think of them huddled in dugouts while shells exploded overhead. Think of them going over the top, facing almost certain death, because their friends were going and they could not let them down. Think of them in that moment at 11:00 a.m. On November 11th, 1918, when the guns finally stopped and they could hardly believe they had survived. Remember them not as faceless statistics, not as numbers in history books, but as individuals, young men with hopes and dreams, with families and lovers, with futures that were stolen from them. Remember them laughing at jokes that make no sense outside the trenches. Remember them singing to keep their spirits up. Remember them showing kindness to each other in the midst of hell. Remember them as human beings, not so different from us, caught in circumstances beyond their control. The First World War is over. It ended more than a century ago. Everyone who fought in it is gone. But it is not truly past. It lives on in the world it created, in the borders it drew, in the institutions it established, in the technologies it developed, in the questions it raised. It lives on in the memories passed down through families, in the photographs yellowed with age, in the medals kept in drawers, in the names carved in stone in cemeteries across Europe. And it lives on as a story we must continue to tell, not to glorify war but to remember its true cost, to honor those who served and suffered, to remind ourselves and future generations of what happens when diplomacy fails, when nationalism runs wild, when leaders commit their nations to wars without fully understanding the consequences. So rest now, knowing that the story has been told once more. The soldiers of the Great War can rest too, their duty done, their sacrifice remembered. The guns are silent, the battles are over. What remains is memory, and the responsibility to learn from that memory, to build a world where such a war can never happen again. Sleep well, remember, and may we never forget the lessons written in blood across the fields of Flanders, the forests of the Argonne, the trenches of the Somme. May we never forget that behind every statistic, every casualty figure, every battle honor, there was a human being who deserved to live, who had every right to a future, who gave everything so that we might have ours. The story is told, the history is recorded, the fallen are honored, and now silence falls, as it fell on that November morning in 1918, when the world held its breath and hoped, against all the evidence, that the war to end all wars had truly ended war forever. Rest now, remember, and let us strive to make their sacrifice mean something. Let us build the peace they dreamed of in the trenches, the world they hoped would emerge from all that suffering. That is how we honor them. That is how we ensure they are never forgotten. That is how we give meaning to the meaningless slaughter. The First World War is over. Long may it remain so. May there never be another. Sleep well, and remember,